We forget that, you know, you go to another place and you're going to see a lot of electric vehicles anywhere else. Here you see them too, but yeah.
And that American motor companies have decided after a certain year not to build any more combustion engine vehicles.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is.
Yeah.
Right. Well, I'm just going to say a few words about the League of, this is the League of Women Voters of Austin Area Environmental Committee Position Update Meeting, which I'm just going to explain a little bit in talking about the advocacy elements of the League of Women Voters. The League of Women Voters is a total volunteer, nonpartisan organization. We never endorse or support candidates. We may, however, take a position on a topic or an issue, and that's where the advocacy comes in. And their advocacy happens at the national, the state, and the local level. So with the Austin League, we are at the local level. And so we're interested in knowing what kind of advocacy we can do within the Austin area. And so the environmental quality position statement has not been updated in a long time, like over 10 years. So it's really time to be thinking about the topics that are really important for us to be incorporating into our position statement, because when something comes up that we do want to take a position on, we need to be able to point to our statements, which are public record. We can also take advantage of the position statements that are at the national and state levels. So it is important for us to be well educated about what's going on nationally and within the state. And as you're talking about, Karen and Smitty, you're talking about what's happening this week at the Texas legislature, which I have described as the kind of witnessing and testimony that people do as formidable work. And we're very grateful to those who are doing this, and we know that we will learn from you. So I'm going to leave it at that. If you want any more information, please let me know about the League of Women Voters and our environmental work. And at this point, Becky and Richard are going to introduce Smitty.
Thank you, Leah. This is Richard Halpin, and my partner Becky and I have known Tom Smitty Smith for many years. He and his partner Karen Haddon have been really champions of people's issues in this state for a long time, particularly issues that people don't know about that will have profound impacts on their lives, like coal plants and other kinds of energy industries and energy industry issues. Tonight, we're privileged that Smitty is going to be presenting a slideshow on the emerging electric transportation industry. Tom Smitty Smith has been a hero for the people of Texas as executive director of the Texas Public Citizen Office for 32 years until he recently didn't retire, still works for the people of Texas doing this kind of really good work. With over 1,000 testimonies before the Texas legislature on hundreds of consumer bills and open government bills and people issue bills. Things people probably don't know about Smitty is in his early days, he was a Vista volunteer. And as a leading Vista volunteer, he helped start the Austin Food Bank and also worked at the Houston Food Bank. So just a little glimmer of things in the past that inform how we get to present. So without further ado, I'd like, Becky, did you want to add anything to that? I think you're muted.
Smitty, you're awesome. Thanks for coming tonight. And every time I listen to your presentation, I learn something new. So take it away.
Thank you very much. And I also want to give a shout out to Richard and Becky. I've known them for maybe 30 years, and they're always at the leading edge of so many different projects and have a lifetime of good service to the people of Austin, and have been steadfast allies and often people who are ahead of us in terms of thinking through what needs to be done. And I'm really grateful for you inviting me tonight and for all the work that you have done in terms of not only this issue, but in climate change and the radioactive waste stuff that we'll touch on in a minute here just briefly. So I want to thank you all for being here. We're at a really exciting time in terms of the transformation of our transportation systems in this country. And so I want to take you on a journey tonight into the future, talk to you about electric vehicles and what's going to happen in the short term and how you can help and some of the opportunities you'll have. As Richard mentioned, I'm retired, but I failed retirement. And I was sitting around thinking about the climate on a hot August morning and realizing that I just couldn't sit around and watch the world burn, and thought about the fights we'd had about coal and how we'd come up with an alternative and renewable energy. And so many of the coal plants in Texas and around the nation were shutting down. And if you looked at the global warming, there are three big components to it: power plants, transportation, and industry. And if you look at the power plant sector, those emissions were dropping rapidly because of renewables. And we now had electric vehicles, which could be a very important tool to reducing the emissions coming from transportation. And so we got together with the utilities, manufacturers, charging companies, and environmentalists, and are come up with a plan for beginning to electrify the transportation system here in Texas. And there are a number of reasons that electric vehicles are really taking off around the world. And in Asia and Europe, the cities are so choked with smog and soot that the air is frequently unbreathable. Think about Mumbai or Beijing or even Paris and London. And they look at electric vehicles as a way to quickly reduce emissions in a decade or so from transportation related emissions, which are the largest single sources. In fact, 32 cities, states, or territories and countries have now banned internal combustion engines in date ranges from 2030 to 2050, including places like Mumbai, Beijing. India has banned internal combustion engines beginning in 2035, I think it is. Paris, London, and a number of other major cities. Electric vehicles have a far lower and more stable fuel and maintenance costs. Although this is an odd year, electric prices remain relatively stable year in, year out, and the price of gasoline has gone up over 40% in just the last 3 months. Electric vehicles can provide grid stability and power you through a storm, and I've got a slide on that I'll show you in a few minutes. And for places like India and China, this is their Henry Ford moment. And rather than try and compete with the United States or Japan in developing internal combustion engines, they've decided to jump ahead and build electric engines and electric vehicles. And they're intending on dominating not only the manufacturing, but the credit systems necessary. So they're doing the GM strategy of not just building the cars, but financing them. And last, you can repower them with renewable energy. Now, there's a massive shift in investments. This chart was done in June, I think it was. We're now over 700 billion and likely to hit $1 trillion by the end of this year in terms of new investments. There are 61 companies in the United States and around the world making electric vehicles. And in Texas, we're going to get there with market incentives, and minor ones at that, But what you see here is when you look at the growth in the bottom chart, battery electric vehicles will be over half the market by 2040. Now, part of the reason this is happening and will happen so quickly is that there are now going to be over 200 electric vehicle models by 2022, including 10 pickup trucks. And just yesterday, I think it was, Rivian was at the state capitol with one of their pickup trucks. It's a four-wheel drive. They call it adventure vehicle. They don't even call it a pickup truck anymore. That is faster than any production V8 engine. This is a pickup truck, mind you. Will outhaul any pickup truck on the road today, and has an interior you can take a hose to. It's got various levels of suspension, so you can have it ride like a plush car or have it ride like so it's an interesting vehicle to be in. But as you see on the right, most of the vehicles are going to be bigger, larger sedans, but mainly SUVs, vans, and things like that, and they'll have far greater range. There are a number of big automakers that are shifting to EVs. Ford, GM, Jaguar, and since the last time this slide was updated, Volvo has now said they're not going to make any more non-electric vehicles after 2025. And what's the big reason? It's just like our cell phones. The reason that our cell phone technology has gotten so much better are basically better battery life. And for those of you who had early model cell phones like I did, you might get 2 hours out of the first batteries where you had to plug them in. Now you can go a day, day and a half. The price of the battery is decreased. When I first bought my first electric car, it cost me $1,000 a kilowatt hour. Now it's down in the $130 a kilowatt hour, or 87% decline in just 10 years. And the range or the density has increased by 6 to 7% per year. So my first car went 35 miles. The current car I have now goes 265 miles on a single charge. And newer cars are now getting over 400 miles per charge if you buy the high-end ones. And this will continue to grow. Interestingly, the new type of battery that was recently developed at UT by Dr. John Goodenough, one of our Nobel laureates here, is 1/3 the weight, goes 3 times as far, and charges in 1/3 the time. And he cooked that up when he was 94. Now, most of us have been through some very substantial changes in our technology in our lives. I'm not old enough to remember horses and buggies to cars, but my grandparents were. My mother grew up and was born in 1914, the year her family bought their first car. It was electric. And by 2034, when they replaced that car, every car on the road was now gasoline that had gone through that transition. I am old enough, however, to remember when we just had radios and not TVs. Most of us remember landlines, desktops rather than tablets or mobile phones. And most of us don't remember when we didn't have any renewables at all. And now we're in the neighborhood of about 30% of the energy in the state coming from renewables. Now, what are the projections in Texas? By 2030, we expect to have somewhere between 15 and 30% of your vehicles being coming from electric cars, and it'd be 41% of sales. Now, interestingly, truckers are going to be the biggest users of electric vehicles, and here's a chart that explains why. If you're driving a truck 200 miles on diesel, it's going to cost you $100. With gas, with electricity, it's going to cost you $23. As one guy from H&B said when he was making a presentation showing these numbers, he said, you know, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to see this will save you a lot of money. And he says the maintenance costs on our prototype electric vehicles are less than half of what it costs to maintain a traditional truck. And what we've seen in prototypes and first models out is they last longer. Instead of getting 250,000 miles on a vehicle, typically you're able to get 400,000 or 600,000 miles without replacing very much except door handles and seats. The technology, and you may have to replace a battery or two, but the technology is so much better because it has fewer moving parts. And like many of the things around our homes, like our air conditioning and stuff like that, that have electric motors, these are typically designed to go 20 years and operate flawlessly during those periods of time. Now, where are we going to charge them all? Most of us will charge at home. 85 to 94% in our most recent poll said we charge at home at night. It's kind of like plugging in your cell phone. When we got home from dinner tonight, we plugged the car in. And if you're in a multifamily, you're probably going to plug in at a public facility or at your apartment complex. Similarly at work, you'll have what's called a level 2 charging system, similar to what you power your dryers with. But when you start to get out into urban areas, like at a shopping center or someplace on the expressway or something like that, you're going to want a fast charger, something that will charge up your car in 20 minutes to a half an hour, ideally within 6 minutes. But that takes a whole lot of power. And if suddenly you start to power 6 semi-trailer trucks all at once, that takes an enormous amount of power, say as much as the city of Lockhart would take at any given time. So we have to plan on where we're going to put these chargers to where we have adequate power. Now, again, most cars and trucks will charge overnight. The good news is we have more than enough wind, so much we have to ground it out overnight in Texas and in Austin in particular. But during the days, we typically power with gas and coal and nuclear. The good news is that bright orange line shows that we're starting to get in now a tremendous amount of solar energy. And by 2030, we expect to have as much wind or solar energy as we currently have wind energy on the system. And that will be coming in right during the time from 10 o'clock until 2 o'clock, when a lot of people are recharging while at work. Now, smart chargers can make sure that we're charging when we have excess power. It's a picture of the charging screens on my car. It's set to go on at night when the wind comes up, and charge from 9 o'clock until 8 o'clock in the morning. And then in the middle of the day, it starts at 10 o'clock and cuts off at 4 o'clock, because the system tends to use the most energy beginning around 4 and going through 7 o'clock at night. That's when the system is peaking, and we don't want to be using electricity to charge our cars. Now, are we going to have enough energy? The big question after the blackouts and the brownouts. And the answer is, if we manage our charging, we'll have more than enough energy to be able to power through the systems. This is one of the big things we recognize, though, is that in order to be able to have electric vehicles be widely adopted, we need to have a system of border-to-border charging stations that'll get us from Borger to in the north to Brownsville in the south, and from El Paso to Orange. And we also need to build in charging stations in our small towns, low multifamily and low income areas. Otherwise, we'll be in a situation like we saw portrayed so vividly during the pandemic, where about a third of Texans could not work from home or go to school because they didn't have adequate broadband. And that's a policy decision this legislature needs to make. It's also really important that we adopt electric vehicles for air pollution, just in Texas, just like other states and nations have done. If you just have 35% of the vehicles in Houston electrified, you reduce air pollution from cars and trucks by 50%. That number is consistent in Austin, San Antonio, Dallas, or wherever you are. You get a bigger bang for your buck by reducing emissions from tailpipes than you do any other source. And it turns out that it's significantly cheaper as well. Now, I don't have the slide in this particular deck, but Austin has been making strides toward reducing climate change gases. since 1990, we were one of the first cities in the country to adopt a goal of reducing our climate emissions. And we've done so primarily through utility-related programs, whether it be renewables or energy efficiency or other demand-side management programs. And we are leading the nation. In fact, the electric vehicle movement in some ways got a big start here because of Austin Energy's promise, along with 13 other cities, to buy 10,000 electric vehicles from whomever manufactured the first. And that drove, and we started getting Los Angeles, New York, some of the really big cities. It really got to be a lot of numbers, over 13,000 vehicles who had soft orders. That convinced GM to build the first commercial electric vehicle in over 15 years. But all that being said, when you look at the data, the total amount of emissions in Austin have gone up 16% per capita during that period of time. And when you look at the map, over 20 years, what you see very quick, actually it's 30 years, what you see clearly is the city has spread so much that the emissions for transportation is what really drives that. As a matter of fact, when we first started working on this in 1990, the emissions from power plants were by far and away the largest single source of climate change gases. Because of our renewables, we've cut that more than half and we'll be down in the mid-20s to just 35% of where we were before. But the amount of emissions from the transportation sector on a per capita basis is up 12%. So we've made it, we're sliding backwards on this. Now, during the big storm, there were a lot of people who did not have power. 60% of the city was without power. Karen and I were looking at what we were going to do if we lost power, and we decided, well, we'd just go hang out in our little electric vehicle, our Leaf. But this is a story of a family here in Austin who climbed in the back of their Tesla, and Teslas have camping mode. It's a button on that allows you to stay warm or cool in your car. And their dog and their 3-month-old baby stayed toasty warm in their car all night long. Now, not all Teslas, but you can order a Tesla with a bed like this in the back. So it actually pops out as a thermarest mattress, and it's really comfortable, I'm told. Now, the other thing is, it's not just Teslas. Our Leaf, which is an inexpensive electric car, would have powered the house for up to 6 days on electricity. And it wouldn't have powered the whole house by any stretch of the imagination, but it would have run our furnace blower, and we have gas heat, and that would have enabled us to run our gas heat and some of our communications devices and a couple of lights. So if you kept we have a 62 kilowatt hour battery, which is the same size as in this car, and we could have stayed warm here in our house. And unlike the Tesla, the Leaf is factory wired to feed back into your home or into the grid. Now, don't electric vehicles cost a lot more? The answer is yes today, but by 2025, it'll be cheaper to buy an electric vehicle than the traditional car. But Consumer Reports did an analysis that showed how much money you would end up saving on fuel and on gasoline, on maintenance rather. And so what you see is over the lifetime costs, you would typically make up the difference in the purchase price through electric vehicles. So although a Tesla might cost you $10,000 more than a Buick or a Lexus, you'll save the money in fuel costs and maintenance costs. Now, without some sort of regulatory or legislative action, we're going to have some problems making sure that we get out to rural towns or multifamily complexes, low-income communities, and out along the secondary roads. I think the charging companies are going to flock to the interstates. We've got to have a plan. Now, Another thing that's interesting, I think most of us know that in Texas, we now have Tesla here in the Austin area. But I think what you may not know is there are 6 other major manufacturing plants in Texas. Peterbilt, which is one of the largest truck manufacturing companies in the United States, makes electric vehicles up in Denton, and they see that becoming a quarter of their business by 2030, 50% by 2040, and maybe 100% by 2050. Navistar, which is the old International Harvester brand that makes primarily school buses, also makes trucks, and they make trucks primarily for HEB and others, but that's why they're in San Antonio, is because HEB is right there, and they're going to be manufacturing electric buses. Hyliion is making the powertrains to go under other people's truck chassis up in Cedar Park. Lone Star up in Texarkana, owned by the Dana chain that you primarily see in Mexico or South America, is headquartered up in Texarkana, and they make what are called drayage trucks, and you see these primarily in ports or places like the HEB warehouses where they haul tractors full of freight from loading yards to warehouses and then back out again. Toshiba over in Houston makes transmissions and electric motors. Arroyo up in the Round Rock area makes what we think of as campus vehicles, the things that kind of putt around typically with a small 2-cylinder engine in them, 2 or 3-cylinder engine in them. And these are becoming now electric based on sophisticated golf cart chassis, but they are great for food trucks, for example, or are becoming now what they call last mile delivery services. And so because they're so much smaller, a UPS truck will have 5 or 6 of these things that are all sort of centered around a drop-off spot. They'll go to the drop-off spot, unload all this stuff onto the back of these little putt-putt things. By the way, the electric ones don't make any noise. And then they'll go disperse around downtown or a neighborhood or two, and then come back and pick up another load at a later point. And then Volcon makes electric motorcycles, which are delightfully quiet, and off-road vehicles, not just for the adventurer, but also the military. And they're in the Austin area, Austin Round Rock area as well. Now, right now we have 13,000 people working in these industries. That's as much as all the people who work in all the convenience stores and gas stations in Texas put together. And we'll have another 5,000, actually it's now 10,000 since this slide was put together, working at Tesla. And we expect a total of 24,000 people working in electric vehicles in 2024 in Texas. And it's not just urban areas, it's 203 counties in Texas of the 254 have something that is made that goes into an electric vehicle. So you've got rural communities in places like Pampa and Tyler and Poteet and places like that that have something that are being manufactured. This is a chart that shows you where some of those counties are. Now, Biden has said he wants to do a number of things both in his platform, but also in his infrastructure plan. He wants to install 500,000 chargers. That puts 65,000 people of them in Texas. And so that's a good chunk of the way to getting our infrastructure built that we need to get into rural areas and small towns. In addition, EVgo, which is one of the largest charging companies in the United States, recently purchased by Shell, has said, we're going to match the Biden plan. We'll also put out 500,000 chargers. And so this is altogether going to be quite a chunk of charging infrastructure. And we just need to make sure we have a plan where this stuff goes. He's also said he wants to do 100% of light duty EVs in the federal fleet It's unclear whether it's 2030 or 2035. He's getting a lot of pushback simply because the existing federal fleet isn't worn out yet, and they have 15 or 20-year lifespans on things like mail trucks. And he's beginning to realize that these things last for a really long time. He's going to expand the EV tax credits and is planning on starting a cash for clunkers program like we had a decade or so ago that will remove a lot of older and polluting cars with electric vehicles. Now, last session, the legislature asked the state agencies to figure out what we would need to do to promote electric vehicles. And they found the PUC are the people who regulate or didn't regulate our electric utility industry have come back and said, you know what, we've got plenty of power, but we need to change some definitions on to make sure that we don't have to regulate charging stations. The TCEQ came back and said there is a reduction in emissions that is proportionate to the number of electric vehicles we have on the road. But they only looked at light duty vehicles, and the real gain is in the medium and heavy duty vehicles. Medium in this context being things like box trucks, and heavy duty being semis is the way I typically think about it. And then they also said that electric vehicles ought to pay their fair share for the roads, and came back and said $100 would be a fair fee. Now, we have worked with that group I mentioned at the beginning to put together a legislation that basically does 6 things. I've got 5 of them on the sheet, it fixes some definitional problems at the PUC. It says that the same people who regulate gas pumps would also regulate electric vehicle chargers. It's called the Department of Licensing and Regulation. Department of Motor Vehicles would set a fee at $100. The Environmental Agency, or TCEQ, would expand its programs, and in addition would serve as a funnel for any federal funds that might come in through the Biden administration. And then TxDOT, or the Highway Agency, would create a task force of 10 state agencies and come up with a plan for deployment of electric vehicles in Texas. So we're now at a point where we have an opportunity that is unique. We know demand is really going to start to come up around 2022, and that by 2030, we're going to have a big problem if we don't get some policies in place. And doing it in advance is always a wise idea. 29 other states have adopted some kind of legislation on electric vehicles that essentially develops the policies in one way or another. And as you know, earlier I mentioned that many countries have now also developed electric vehicle policies. And so if we act now, we can get ahead of the boom. And when that boom happens, we can accelerate into the future. One of the things I have learned over the now 40 odd years I've been doing advocacy around the state capitol is that the legislature oftentimes gets excited about new and big ideas. And just like they took very strong proactive action in the early 80s to pass the legislation that created the microcomputer consortium that was headquartered here and has propelled Texas and particularly the Austin area into now becoming called the Silicon Hills. We have seen that kind of initiative, pre-planning and working together, pay off enormously for the Austin community. And we're seeing the same kind of cluster here because of policies developed by Austin Energy to attract electric vehicle manufacturers. And we need to spread this across the rest of the state. And I think we're going to be able to do that should this bill pass. But the other thing we've seen is when people like Richard and Becky and Dale and Pat Beulah and Karen and many other people got together, we worked on renewables policy. And that renewables policy has made us not just the leader in the United States in renewable energy, but we're now 5th in the world in production of renewable energy in Texas because of the activities of people that I've mentioned on the phone. I forgot Karen, she was very much involved in that as well. And started the Solar Austin program, which has paid off in ways too numerous to mention. But what we've seen is that by developing those policies, we can create enormous amounts of jobs. And today, there are more people working in renewable energy in Texas than in the coal industry in Texas. And as a result of that, we've created an economic boom in over 48 counties in Texas and have generated billions of dollars a year in revenues and hundreds of millions in lower costs. And that's what our challenge is, to be able to create those opportunities to develop the policy. Now, how can you help? We're now at a point where there are 2 components of this that are about ready to pop. One is we got the underlying bill, Canales' 2221, which I described earlier, out of committee, and it is now headed to the House floor. We expect that the House will debate it beginning probably the week after next, or the first full week of May. And we will need calls and letters to members of the House. And the Austin delegation is very aware of this, likely to be very supportive. But if there are those of you who live in the Round Rock area or Pflugerville, like Richard and Becky, or live in Senator Donna Campbell's territory, like Karen and I have the misfortune of doing, those calls to those folks in those areas would be particularly helpful, and particularly those senators. Now, in addition, there are 2 bills that are particularly punitive to electric vehicles that would assess a $200 fee per electric vehicle instead of $100 for road and maintenances. And that means that somebody driving an electric vehicle would pay more in gasoline taxes than somebody who drives a Ford pickup truck that not only does more damage to the roads, but arguably and certainly pollutes more. Those bills are Senate Bill 1728, which is likely to hit the Senate floor either later this week or first part of next week, and House Bill 427, which is expected to make its way to, it has not been kicked out of committee yet, so hopefully we'll be able to hold it there. But if 1728 comes out of the Senate, it will go to the House, and there'll be a robust debate over there. And we're going to need your help in those areas. And as I mentioned, working together, we, the League of Women Voters, the various environmental organizations, and various business interests have made enormous progress to make Texas a better place over the last 30 years. This is one of those areas where we can do it again. And so with that, I'll close and be happy to answer any questions. If there's a little bit of time, I know Karen would like to share a message or 2 about radioactive waste, but let's take the questions on the electric vehicle stuff first. Richard, you're muted.
Leah, would you like to handle this, or do you want to call on people as they raise their hands?
I think we need to, I can't see who might be raising their hands, but people can just go ahead and jump in, I think, with a question if
Okay,
they.
sure. Sure. Okay, jump in.
Okay,
folks, if you
Smitty,
wanna...
yeah, well, you got your screen off there. That's good. Okay, yeah, Go ahead, folks anyone have a question?
This is Steve Poole. I'm sorry my camera's not working, so you can't see me, but I have a couple of questions. Texas is an oil and gas state. Republicans are pretty serious about that. What do Republicans think about, electric vehicles? It's gonna take away some oil and gas revenue. I mean, I'm all for it, but what do Republicans think about it?
Well, I think there are mixed
Good
minds.
question.
Speaker, for example, said when we were lobbying him, he said, I come from a family that's made its money in oil and gas. And we recognize that electric vehicles are coming and that we as Texans will either stand in the way or we'll get ahead of the game. And I think there are a number of Republicans who think that's the case and are willing to take steps to get ahead of the game. And and there are a lot of people in the oil and gas industry who are doing whatever they can, including trying to put high fees on electric vehicles to make them less attractive. And so our goal, our challenge is to figure out ways to get around them. And ever beats organized political money is organized people.
Yeah, all right. And then my other question is, why are fuel cell vehicles not, in the mix? Since with a fuel cell, it seems like you could just pull out to a gas station, just like you do, and fill up with your whatever it is, hydrogen, without any need to have a charging time. Is it just because the technology is not far along, or?
So the answers are several. I worked on fuel cell vehicles 20 odd years ago and thought it was a very promising technology, and I still do to some extent. But the problem in those days was that the membrane that made the fuel cells work was too fragile for mobile use. And so it just didn't work very long. However, that technology that problem has now been cured. The infrastructure cost, however, with either piping hydrogen or having hydrogen reformers in your home or at a gas station is really high, and everybody's got a plug to their home, almost everybody. So it's just faster and easier to have people plug in than it is to put the hydrogen infrastructure out. Now, there are some types of vehicles where hydrogen makes a lot of sense and where there is infrastructure and where that may be appropriate. For example, in the ports of Houston or all along the Gulf Coast, there are interestingly 28 ports in Texas where you have lots of refineries. There are large parts of the state that have surplus hydrogen that's literally piped from one chemical plant to another or right through the ports, and it's a great opportunity to utilize hydrogen. And the other thing that it does is electric batteries are heavy at this point and will continue to be so for the rest of the decade. And so there are significant weight limits on because we don't want to damage the roads. However, hydrogen is lighter than air. So if you're fully laden, hydrogen will actually lift the vehicle or make it lighter and less damaging to the road, and you can load more in. So for over-the-road uses or places where you're hauling and dumping and coming back to refuel, it's a perfect strategy. So you'll see it evolving along in ports and in uses where they're going back and forth to a garbage dump or along major interstate corridors. Interstate 5 up and down California is hydrogen piped. We're talking about doing hydrogen piping along Interstate 45 from Houston to Dallas, and then perhaps up to Oklahoma City. So that's what.
Thanks. I have another question, but I don't want to monopolize, so I'll wait to see if anybody else has questions.
I want to ask a question. And just listening to what your last comment here, Smitty, what I'm thinking of is how we really have to get to the consumer. And one of the things that you're doing through your website and your outreach and talks like this is to help change attitudes among the consumers so that consumers are seeing, oh, this is a really good thing for me to do, to buy an electric vehicle. At the same time, it's not within everybody's reach. And then if companies are making that even harder, like you're saying, they're making punitive, that's really going to hold us back from changing consumer attitudes, because it seems to me that's really key, is changing consumer attitudes. What are some things that you have thought about along those lines for changing consumer attitudes?
So I think there's a number of things. When you look at what drives people to buy an electric vehicle, for women primarily, and for young people, it's the environmental characteristics. For men, it's new technology. It's the gee whiz thing. And so it's really interesting. There's almost a direct parallel. Women, I think 54% because bought their electric vehicle because of environmental, 50-something% of the men bought it because of the new technology. And that's what's going to get a lot of young people as well. And secondly, we are looking for and have had some luck in finding influencers in new energy or in different clusters of the population. We put together a little YouTube video with a woman by the name of Anita Butarego, who is a BMX bike rider. And she is 28, kind of punky, and is whip smart and funny. And we did a videotape of her being introduced to her first electric vehicle and watched her enthusiasm as she was driving that vehicle. And then showed all these videos of her doing tricks on her BMX bike and her boyfriend and dog kind of cruising along behind her, he on his skateboard and the dog running like crazy to keep up with all of them. And it was a really funny little video. And we got 75,000 hits on that particular video. And so we're now looking for similar sort of influencers who are African American, who are Latinx, or who are very young people. As I have learned, perhaps the most important influencer in a family is the 13-year-old who gets really critical of his or her parents and says to mom and dad at a point where they're considering buying a car, I can't believe you're buying a dinosaur-powered car anymore. Who would buy that kind of old technology? Why don't you get a Tesla or something cool? And you get a 13-year-old girl ragging her parents like that and circulating it around amongst other 13-year-old girls or boys. And we all know what the girls do is what the boys follow and will quickly try and adapt to. You can change the world very quickly. So if you got any 13-year-olds in your family that are thinking about electric vehicles, let me know. We're looking for the classic. So we're going to.
That's a great example. This video that you're talking about, is that available? Is that something that I could find and post a link to in our newsletter?
Yeah, it's on the TechCetera website.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and she's very cool. She's very, very cool.
That's a great idea. You're thinking like the younger population when you start to think about identifying influencers.
And I got an 85-year-old woman. This is not picking on any of you because none of you are, who is a national champion powder puff derby driver. As you recall, powder puff derbies were when people of my age and younger, apparently a little bit older, used to go out and do drag races or road races and kind of tried to bust up the image of fast cars only being for men. Anyway, she now drives an EV. She drives a Tesla, and she says, "I'll smoke you." And the only thing smoking is her tires when she takes off, and because it's a four-wheel drive, all four wheels are smoking. And then there's a little old lady from Pasadena soundtrack that plays in the back, which is appropriate for those of us who remember that particular era, but there aren't that many of us. So it's a fun little video in a much more limited market.
So I have a question. Talk about the Texas legislature again in a little more detail. Would you? You mentioned House Bill 2221
Right.
as a pro bill, and then you mentioned House Bill 427 and Senate Bill 1728 as negative bills. What if people have interest? What pretend some of us have never gotten involved in the legislature. Who do we call? What do we say to them? And when do we give them a call and tell them what we think?
So I would call your senators on Senate Bill 1728 and just say, introduce yourself and say, I have a lot of concerns about this bill because it would unfairly penalize electric vehicle owners and drivers and charge them a fee that's far higher than a pickup truck driver would pay. And that's just not fair. Electric vehicle owners are willing to pay their fair share, which is probably closer to $100. And we would like your support in not killing tomorrow's technology and suppressing jobs here in Texas. And one of the things that you can mention is that the Rivian pickup truck company has recently come and testified in both the House and Senate, saying that electric vehicle fees are a key thing they look at in deciding where to build new factories. So just like many other things in the Texas legislature, the policies adopted by the legislature could drive away manufacturing, and we don't want that to happen. And for those of you who are in the Austin area, say the electric vehicle manufacturing industry is booming here in Texas, and we want to continue to make that happen. So.
Okay, question here from Greg Bolton with Mary Pat. Do you have any comments to make about hybrid vehicles?
Mm-hmm. I'm on my third. They're extraordinary, and they last far longer than a traditional car. Their pollution is significantly less depending on the hybrid you buy. The advantage of them being that they don't run as often as a traditional vehicle. As those of you who own them or have owned them, you know that when you pull up to a stoplight, they turn off. When you're cruising, they aren't running all the time. And as a result, the emissions aren't continuous. They're amongst the things that are in those bills are a proposal to charge hybrid vehicle owners an additional $100 on their registration. So the penalty is even higher for those of you who drive a hybrid than it would be on those people who drive an electric vehicle in terms of the net cost, because you're also paying gas. So, for example, we currently have a hybrid Toyota SUV that I bought to replace my a previous hybrid, and it only gets 4 miles per gallon better than the SUV that a traditional SUV would. But it does pollute less. But the bottom line is, I still have to buy gas. I pay a lot for gas in that thing, and I would end up having to pay $100 more. So I end up losing money by driving a hybrid. The cost of that additional fee would wipe out any gas savings I might have.
So I have a question, a completely different question going in a really unusual way. I think it's clear to all of us that the grid is very fragile these days. So we're looking at either getting some kind of a generator so we can have power if the grid goes down, or depending on battery. And someone pointed out to us, and it may have been you, Smitty, but that a lot of electric car batteries are actually bigger than the Tesla batteries that you can get, Powerwall batteries, and that you could probably use them the same way if you needed to during a power outage. So what would you advise in that way? Because I think a lot of people are starting to think now that they need to have backup in case the grid goes down.
You've hit on a couple of good points. If rather than spend the money on the Tesla Powerwall battery, buy an electric vehicle or a hybrid vehicle, because you can operate your home off of either of those things. And particularly with a hybrid that has gasoline associated with it, with the right system of inverters and so forth, you can park it outside, run it through an inverter, run your furnace and a couple of lights and some communication devices, and when the battery runs down, the gas engine kicks in, recharges the battery, etc. But a car like the Toyota Leaf or the Nissan Leaf I have is factory wired, and there are others, some of the Kias that would enable you to provide power back to your home with the factory wiring. And that inverter also would enable you to take energy from the solar on your roof and recharge your battery at any time, but particularly during winter storms and so forth. That's another way to keep your battery charged. If your battery runs down, like we saw happen in Austin, it's likely that a portion of most of our cities would remain lit. And you can just drive your car into a charging station in that particular segment of town.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so you just recharge it there, drive back home. It's kind of like filling up the tank on your gas.
Oh, a great idea.
And that way you get the benefit of an electric car and save money too, and make bigger reductions in emissions. And what you spend on a Tesla Powerwall would help you afford to do that. Plus, the Tesla Powerwall is technology that's first generation, and I think will probably be rapidly outmoded.
It's Karen Hashke. I may have missed, I had to leave the call a couple of times to pay a workman and a yard man, and you may have answered this, so I apologize. I didn't hear with the ERCOT fiasco during the cold spell, and if there's an increasing demand on power sources with more electric vehicles, are we also going to be able to increase our power sources? And also in light of the vast number of people moving to Texas, because we have to service stations all over the state.
So it's a really good question. And the answer is the fastest growing source of electricity in Texas is renewable energy. And with appropriate use of the timing devices on the car, you can take advantage of that renewable energy, which often is in excess of our demand, and store it in the grid. Now, just as I have mentioned a couple of times, you can use electric vehicles today, my Leaf, but in the future, other vehicles, to put power back into your home. or into the grid, in the next 10 years, we will have technologies currently rapidly available that will enable the batteries in the electric vehicles to help provide the power needs of the state, particularly on peak. Now, if you'll go on a mind trip with me downtown or someplace where, like to a hospital or something like that, you have noticed this a lot. So often you ignore it. But on a hot summer day, what you'll oftentimes hear or see is the cloud goes over the sun and suddenly the city gets quieter. The cloud goes away and you hear air conditioning compressors all over the place kicking back in as your home begins to heat up. That starting of your air conditioning compressor is what really drives the peak demand for energy in the summer in Texas. And just like it takes a lot of energy to overcome the inertia or to start your car moving in the summer, same thing is true with your air conditioning system. You use a substantial slug of energy for a very short period of time to start up all those air conditioning compressors. Imagine having 200 of those electric vehicles parked in a major hospital, for example. You could reduce the demand for electricity by powering that big compressor on that hospital roof for the first 30 seconds with all of the electric vehicle batteries being hooked up in tandem, helping provide that surge. And it's exactly the same kind of duty cycle that an electric vehicle has when you're getting on the expressway and surging up to 60 miles an hour. Those vehicles are designed to do that. It's just providing power to the grid. So we can help reduce the peak amount of power or the excess energy that we generate just to provide that surge of energy when the clouds go away from the sun on a hot summer day. And that's remarkably wasteful because we're burning all kinds of gas and stuff like that just to keep the lights on for those little surges. And so we not only have enough power, we'll have enough power, but technology will help us make sure that we don't overload the grid with these vehicles.
Well, I was impressed with the man who had mentioned that he'd powered his house and kept his, infant daughter and dog and wife, warm during the ice spell. But I think that at present, owning a Tesla is still an elitist car.
Yes, that's a very good question. And let me go to that point. Electric vehicles are still more expensive, unless you get a screamer deal like I did on my lease. I paid $87 a month on a lease for my car, and it was a $3,000 down payment. So those kinds of screamer deals at the end of the year are frequently available. But what's going to happen fairly quickly is electric vehicles are going to hit the used market in a substantial number. And when that happens, typically what Consumer Reports has found is that they sell for 25% less than a conventional vehicle. Perhaps because people are afraid of the long-term maintenance costs or because of the federal incentives for buying a new one. But whatever, that vehicle will suddenly become far more affordable to less affluent families or to young people who will want to see what kind of bargains are out there and be attracted to the technology. So within the next 3 to 5 years, we'll see that huge glut of cars coming off of leases that are really good deals. It'll be a good time to snap them up. And then particularly for low-income families, you spend about 30% of your income on transportation. And if you buy an electric vehicle, that number drops down by half, down to about 13% of your expenses going to transportation if there's charging available. So it becomes a really good deal. And so we're working with people in the low income community and the people who provide housing into those communities, the churches and the nonprofit community to begin to figure out how to provide charging that will enable that to happen. And again, in this situation, we're a bit ahead of the curve. And so we have the opportunity to get the answer right.
Tell us again what car you drive and what deals we should look for at the end of the year.
So I drive a Nissan Leaf, which is a great car, but I wouldn't buy one on a long-term basis because the Nissan Leaf has a charging head, a plug that will be quickly outmoded by 2022. But electric vehicles, you can buy a Chevrolet Bolt today for somewhere around $130 a month on a lease. And last I knew, it was something similar, like $3,000 down, or maybe a used car in trade. And they are being sold so cheaply because the technology is about to change. And if I were to, my recommendation would be at this stage in the game to lease rather than to buy, because the technology that you buy today will be outmoded in 3 years. And you will wish that you had not purchased one of them, because you'll be able to get a far better car that has greater range, charges faster, might be more suitable to whatever your needs might be. And I've never leased a car before. And I really thought about it for a long time because I am adverse to that, but it seems to be working.
So
Pat has had her finger up for a minute, Richard.
okay, go ahead.
But Pat, you need to unmute yourself, please.
Sorry, on 1728, to contact our own senator or a whole committee?
The whole Senate.
Bill.
The whole Senate. This is going to the Senate floor. It's very quickly.
Okay, and same with the 22, 21?
A whole house.
Okay.
Pat, so is that it, Pat? Did you get your question answered?
Yes.
Okay, so Smitty, I'm trying to wrap my head around something you just said. If we own electric vehicles, we can power our houses in emergency situations. Talk
Yep.
about that a little bit more. Does that technology actually exist now?
Yes.
And if so, how does it work?
Well, so many of us over the years have purchased an inverter, something that you plug into your cigarette lighter that enables you to power your computer while you're driving down the road, or recharge other battery operated appliances, or to provide lights or fans while you're camping or something like that. It's the same basic technology. It's an inverter technology. Some cars like Leafs and soon the Kias and the Rivian and others will have the technology built in that enables you to provide power back to your house. And then on your walls, when you when you get an electric vehicle, you'll hang a box that has a plug that comes out of it that takes the 220 power from your house and puts it into your car for about twice as much as the cheapest one of those costs. I think I paid, the last one I bought was 120 bucks. So this will be probably $200 to $300. You can buy what's called a two-way plug, and that will enable you basically to power back into your house and then provide power to whatever you have plugged in. Now, if you have too much plugged in, it'll blow a fuse on the car and probably on your wall, and you want to limit it. But for example, if you like I or many people in Austin have a gas furnace, you have the ability to run the blower in your house. And it doesn't take much power to run a blower on your furnace, and it will enable you to run the control system. Now, that's in the winter time. You would not be able to run or air condition your whole house off of an electric vehicle on the hot summer afternoon when the power goes down. But you would also be able to run communications devices and some lighting. You probably would not run a freezer or refrigerator, particularly during the summer. And in the winter, you can put your food outside if it's really cold. or at least put it in ice chest so it doesn't freeze. But there are ways you can do that. Yeah, that technology. They've got Leaf has a leaf to home product that they can provide you.
I'm sure that we could keep asking you questions about all kinds of areas related to this technology for another few hours. There's really a lot to think about here with the ways in which we already have the tools that we need and the things that we don't have. And, you know, to bring those two things together is going to, it's a challenge for the next, you know, 10 to 20 years, really. But it's clear that we really are going to see a big difference. And I guess that's the key, is to convince the legislatures, as well as really make sure that this is something that this revolution, this technological and electrical revolution, doesn't leave anybody behind. Like you said in one of your slides, that we don't create a new digital divide. That's really very unsettling to think about, how this can be leaving out huge groups socioeconomically. So there's a lot here to think about. And I thank you very much for bringing all of this to our attention. And you know, it gives us some great information to share, and we'll be posting this recording so that the rest of the league members who weren't watching tonight will have a chance to look at. And people do watch these things later on. So I really appreciate all that you've helped us learn tonight and think about.
Well, thank you very much. And I do want to also mention, I don't know if she's still on the line, but Richard and Karen and Susie Bell and several, and Pat have all been working on this radioactive waste issue. This one's also going to be very hot in the next week or so.
Yeah.
Bill numbers are up at the first thing in the chat. So if you have a few minutes, the radioactive waste is going to be a problem for millennia here in Texas. Matter of fact, a million years. We absolutely need to protect ourselves from the costs that will be incurred from our poor policies. So please take a look at the chat, give your legislators a call on that one too.
Yes.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, and I've seen it. Susie Bell is on the call, and Karen Hayden too. And just before we go, if either of you want to take a couple minutes to make any further comments about these bills, please do so.
I don't know if Karen would like to go first. Karen, you want to say something?
Yeah, I'll make it quick. I sent an email to Lee, and hopefully she can send it around.
I will do that.
It has an action alert, and we're trying to hold up the bad bills on both the House and the Senate side, and it's worth calling any and all legislators on that. That is the number one most important thing. It's also good to call the lieutenant governor and the governor. And so that email hopefully will be coming to you. And feel free to call at any time if you'd like anything more.
Okay, I will be sure to do that.
Thanks, and thanks for the EV talk.
Yes, thank you. Susie Bell, do you have anything you want to add to that?
I would like to just say thank you. Of course, the Halpins have been wonderful, but Lee, you started this environmental committee and are following through. And it's just so important as a league member that we are just as active as we can possibly be.
Absolutely.
So always trying to bring people into the loop and try to educate them from the most basic things, like go to the league website. That's one of the things you might show, how people can go to the league website and see the environmental or the education or whatever issues, and just get involved in the political process. Because Smitty taught me this 20 years ago, and that is the only thing that beats lots of money is lots of people. And when I try to encourage, I say that to myself. So it's just one more call, one more person involved, and you all are doing a great job in Austin. And thank you very, very much.
Well, thank you, Susie Bell, for mentioning that. And I'll just put a plug in for the Texas State League's action alerts. I have found those to be really very helpful. And whenever I get that email, I get on it right away. And that's a good way to communicate, is to pay attention to those action alerts that we get from the State League, because I think they've been just really very timely and very effective. And we have really jammed up their phone lines on a number of occasions, I know, with the number of phone calls that we've made. So, well, thank you all very much for this evening. And I really appreciate the work that everybody's doing here. And we'll be meeting again. The next meeting of the committee, I haven't set that yet, but you know, I think we'll be ready to start, you know, thinking about drafting some points for the position update statement that we want to make, and the way we want to add to that. I think we've considered a lot of topics, so there certainly are many more things we could be studying. This could go on forever, but in terms of improving our position statement, I think we can take a stab at it pretty soon. So, and thank you again, Becky and Richard, for your help in getting Smitty here tonight. I really appreciate that. Yeah,
Thank you.
Thank you, Smitty.
Thank you all for
So,
inviting me, and thanks for your attention.
okay, you're very welcome. Good to meet you tonight. Happy trails.
Happy
Thanks.
trails.
Happy
Good night,
trail.
everybody.
Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Good night.
Be well, everybody. Be well.
Yeah,
Bye.
Yep, take care,
Bye-bye.
everybody. Yep, get active.
get
Still
active.
be radioactive.
Bye.
Yeah, that's good. Get active so we're not radioactive. There you
Right.
go.
I like it.
Okay,
Bye-bye, thank you. Thank you.
bye-bye.